Tens of millions are invested in education each year. Between the buildings and infrastructure, salaries and supplies, and curriculum needs, it takes a lot to educate our children. Yet, our national exam results and averages tell a much different story. Our children are not making the grade. On paper, governments continue to make education a national priority as the path to the future. Yet so many school-aged children lack minimum requirements like basic literacy and numeracy. So who's to blame? And how do we fix a problem that's been decades in the making? Who do we get to help our kids to make the grade in education? Welcome to On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. As the school bell rings around the country this week, tonight's guest shouldered much of the responsibility of getting our public school kids back into the classroom. We've got a list of questions for the Director of Education, our featured guest tonight. So stay tuned as we get started on the other side of this break. This is On the Record, and tonight we are pleased to welcome the Director of Education, Dominique McCartney-Russell. Madam Director, welcome to On the Record.
Thank you.
And it's good to have you here. I know that you have not been in the role for a full year, but this is your first back-to-school period. I've got to ask, how's it going?
It's going quite well. Yes, we have a lot of things going on with recruitment and school repairs and putting administrators in place, so it's quite busy.
Well, we certainly will get into all of that over the next hour or so. In her national address on Sunday, Education Minister Glenys Hannah Martin said, "We must ensure that our children leave fully literate, numerate, technically skilled and able to think critically." What do we need to make this happen for our children?
Well, there are so much things that we can do to ensure that our children are able to self-actualize. And one of the ways that we're seeking to do that, first and foremost, you know, we had the pandemic. For some of our students, we also had the Hurricane Dorian, and that revealed a lot of, or I should say exacerbated, the issues that were already present, but made them even more prominent in terms of learning gaps. We had knowledge gaps, we had skills gaps, motivation, communication, conflict resolution issues, and so we have sought to, test all of our children so that we could ascertain what the real issues were. And so it speaks to testing, speaks to remediation, speaks to providing support for students who may be at risk for failure because of behavioral issues, so not just academic, but behavioral, social issues. So it takes the entire village to bring all of these strategies together to ensure children learn.
Now, where does the breakdown typically happen for kids in grasping the necessary literacy and numeracy skills that they need? And I pose that question because these are the fundamentals of a child's education. But often we see high school graduates who lack those basic skills, and then they become adults and working adults who lack those basic skills. So where does this breakdown typically happen for our children?
For us, it's globally, it's at the pre-primary level. And that's one of the reasons why we focus on universal pre-primary education, We want children in school as early as 3 and 4 because it's at that age, those age groups, where the foundation is laid. And so, you know, gross and fine motor skills, all of those we want to develop. Children learning how to hold a pencil or playing, using their environment and their senses to learn. And so it's important for us to ensure that children are given those opportunities. And right now, we do not have universal pre-primary education. And so we would have partnered with some private organizations, and we support our children that way. So we have our classes. We also have the standalone schools, pre-primary schools, and then we have private operators who, of course, we regulate and we monitor to make sure that they're providing those opportunities. And we seek to encourage our parents to ensure that children are enrolled. And not only that, that they are given reinforcements at home.
Well, you know, and it's interesting because in my mind, I'm getting to that question that, you know, at that age and at that stage of the development, it would seem that the parents should be the primary drivers of that foundation.
Yes, parents should definitely be the primary drivers of it. Sometimes, though, because of conflicting priorities, it's not always at the forefront. And so that's why we seek to encourage, even you know, when they visit for prenatal care, our nurses would encourage, you know, these are the things that you should be doing, even with the baby in the belly, you know, in the...
Read books.
Yes, read books to them. Classical music, you know, all of those things that would stimulate them, that stimulate the cognitive development even while they're in the womb. And so we have sought to encourage all of our parents to make sure that their children are enrolled in a preschool.
Teachers say to me or have said to me, you know, our primary education most times is where the basic learning, and the kids usually are okay at that level. Yeah. But once they start to move on, that's where the breakdown really occurs, because they start to grow up and things happen.
Yes. Normally, particularly our GLAT results at grade 3, they're very good. In fact, even though we've had the pandemic and the Hurricane Dorian, we have seen in our GLAT results this year in grade 3, they have improved. Even though those children, when they came in, they would have lost 2 or 3 years. Sure. You know, so you could imagine the routines that teachers had to put in place and the just making children ready for learning. And so we have seen growth in that area. However, when they get to grade 4 and, you know, the curriculum starts to expand, and of course we are asking for them to participate in different subjects, you know, you have more subjects, more content, and we start to see where there's a decline, and normally the decline is in our boys. And so we have instituted in our curriculum, we're seeking to realign that curriculum that allows for more experiential learning. You know, we know from the studies that boys tend to want more hands-on, more kinesthetic. They want to touch, they want to smell, they want to, you know, feel and experience their learning. And so we're seeking to provide more opportunities for that.
Now, the Ministry, I know, commissioned a report on factors impacting our school-aged children. Can you talk about what are some of the findings of that report?
Well, there are some preliminary results, and of course the home environment, whether children are being given reinforcement opportunities, because what we do at school, 6 hours a day, we expect that is reinforced in the home. And so you would find that there are environmental issues. Some of our children are the caregivers of their homes. Wow. Some of them take care of their younger siblings. You know, we especially saw a lot of that during the pandemic because their parents had to go out and work. And so we saw some of that. We also, in the preliminary results, we look at teacher readiness in terms of, you know, what our teachers do in the classroom. The studies say that the teacher has the greatest effect size on student achievement. And so what we do it matters. Also, we saw a kind of lethargy towards education because there are conflicting, what do I call, you know, our students love their tablets and love the social media, you know.
They love these things,
Yes.
the electronics,
And
they love
so
these things.
we have to now make learning, we have to compete. We have to compete with social media, and sometimes it means jumping through hoops, literally, you know, doing cartwheels and steps. I remember as a teacher doing that, but it means that we have to reimagine education. And many of our team members, especially our younger teachers, you know, they have embraced the technology and they're utilizing the technology not as a panacea for all of the issues we have in education, but to augment what they do in the classroom.
Well, that is interesting to me, because I think to, you know, put a textbook and a writing, writing sheets in front of children now only, it's just not practical.
No.
When they are working on tablets from their infants, when they are playing with phones and using phones from their infants, and now you want to go back to, you know,
Yes.
my era.
And the attention span for these children, it's very short, 15 minutes.
Wow.
And so we have employed strategies and we have trained our teachers. For example, we have a strategy called the egg timer approach, where you teach for 10 minutes, but when we say you teach, you use strategies that ensure that it is a student-centered education where they're doing most of the work, you know, problem-based or performance-based strategies. But after that 10 minutes, you give them an activity, whether that's group or individual activity, and then you give them another 10 minutes of training, and then you give them an activity. And by doing that, you kind of help with the short attention span. And then also you ensure that they move around in the classroom, that there is movement, and that they are given experiences outside of the classroom. You know, we want it to be an authentic opportunity for the children.
I listen to you and I think, where were these strategies when I was in school? I wish. But anyway.
But I had those. I had those in my classes.
We couldn't move.
Wow.
We had to sit still. Anyway, Minister in her address on Sunday also announced another study that the ministry has taken on. Let's listen into her comments.
This will inform future policies and practices so that more and more of our young people are able to achieve mastery in mathematics. A fundamental prerequisite to all of our efforts, however, is the requirement to fully understand and accurately assess the impact of learning loss as a result of the extended shutdowns in the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. We must not forget that for almost 2 years, our students were not in face-to-face instruction, and many children were not receiving any instruction at all.
Listening to that and to her comments, what do we hope to achieve from this study?
Well, first and foremost, when we look at our 10-year review of our GLAD scores, you know, we saw that there is a concerning trend in math. Our children have been, they've not been grasping the concepts. And, you know, when you think about math, you think about pure and applied math. That's the physics and the engineering, for example. And math is about solving problems. We want our children to be able to solve problems, to think critically. More than that, though, we want our children to realize that they use math every day, you know, in budgeting, costs, you know, looking at time, etc. And so we want to remove the stigma that math is difficult, and that's what we've been discovering, not just among our children, though, among some of our teachers who teach it at the primary level. And so for us, we desire with this study to ascertain what are the real issues. Is it teacher training? And why do our children, why don't they like math? Why do they not excel at math? And it's not just a Bahamian phenomenon, it's actually a global phenomenon. And so we're also reviewing from different countries what are their issues, and of course identifying those countries who perhaps are doing well. Why are you doing well? And so our desire really is to remediate and to assist our children so that they would love math and then of course apply themselves.
It's interesting, you know, that's 30 years too late for me. Because I still get anxious over things to do with math when I have to. Sometimes basic as addition, You know, I'm not confident. Sometimes I say, you know what, let me recheck this.
Yeah.
Because you're right that there is that fear that you hear a lot of people say, oh, you know, I'm not good at math, or I just did the very basic.
You're right.
And just in listening to your comments, you're right. When it comes down to budgeting, time management, all those things, they're related and they all tie back into our mathematics skills.
Yes, and people actually shut down. I have officers at the Ministry of Education who shut right down when it comes to math. You know, they don't want to look at the numbers. So there is some trauma, some childhood trauma, and you see memes where the child would say, okay, when we get the example, it's 1 + 1 = 2, and then when you get the test, it's 2a + 6b divided by the square root of 27. You know, and so we have to take that fear away, and the way we do that is we ensure that children are given the authentic experiences. And so if you teach fractions, for example, bringing in a pizza and cutting it into the slices. You see what I'm saying? Giving them, and when they go outside. And if you think about it, our children are engaged in Junkanoo. They learn how to design costumes and build costumes, all of that. That's math skills. And so we have to tie the theory with the practical, real-world examples. And we've discovered that when students are given both aspects, they learn and they love it. They see the practicality of math.
And I think you're definitely on the right path when it comes to that. I want to change our focus just slightly. Up to Sunday, 3 campuses still had final works remaining, which will be completed after school hours. What's the status of those schools at this point?
Uriah McPhee Primary is open today. And the reason we had some issues there, a lot of times when contractors go into the space, and the first time they go in, they do a scope of work. And you look and you see, okay, this needs to be done. And then when they start moving things and they see more work. And so our contractors discovered that there were some more issues at Uriah McPhee Primary that needed to be mitigated. And so it meant that we had to say to parents, you know, we need our children out of the environment. It's not conducive. It's a hazard. And there was a lot of dust there. And we had some issues with the AC unit. And so we got the cleaning, we got the extra work done. Mind you, there are still some work going on, but those will be done after school. But it is in a state where children are able to participate. At R.M. Bailey, there's a whole lot of work going on at R.M. Bailey and Government High School. And I can say to you, our team members are ecstatic, because we are building a whole performing arts center in Government High. We have a whole guidance counseling center there. We also have, we're focusing on special education, you know, those children who have mild and moderate intellectual deficiencies. And so those 2 schools have major work going on. However, we're bringing in the students, we call it staggering, where a grade level will come in for orientation, then another grade level, until we bring them all in.
Okay, all right. But I'm happy to hear, particularly with Government High and the Performing Arts Center, because that school for a long time was known for its performing arts.
And it still is. You know, they're doing a fantastic job there. However, we saw the need to outfit them with some greater support and to expand their horizon, because Mr. Justin Stillion and his team, they're doing such a fantastic job. And not just a government high school. All over the country we have excellent music programs and performing arts programs. However, government high school has really been neglected, and there were some real hazards there, some real issues that we needed to address.
Some 50 technical teachers have been placed in, or are being placed in, Abaco, Andros, Auckland, Crooked Island, Bimini, Cat Island, and Eleuthera, Exuma, Grand Bahama, Inagua, Long Island, and in New Providence. Let's talk about how you intend to use these technical teachers and what subjects they will be there to teach.
Years ago, we focused mainly on 20% of our students. When I did the GCEs, you know,
finally someone else who did GCs.
Yes.
I can relate to. Good. All right.
Yes. And so it catered to 20% of our children, you know, and so that's one of the reasons why the BGCSE was established. in 1993, I believe. And the idea was to ensure that we expanded our access for our children. And so you will find that a lot of our children, they want to participate in careers that are technical and vocational in nature. And so we ought to provide those opportunities for them in building trades, electronics, welding and plumbing, engineering. You know, we want to ensure that we are providing for our clients. And our clients have said to us, we want more apprenticeship programs, we want more hands-on programs that allow us to gain the theory, but also the practical. And what I mean by that, in the classroom, they learn the theory, and then they actually go on to the work site. They get an opportunity to become apprentices for those organizations, and 9 times out of 10, they end up getting a job. You see what I'm saying? And so our children have said to us, that's what we want, and we are providing it.
And so these technical teachers are being placed to give specific emphasis to those areas.
Yes, and before, most of our technical teachers were in New Providence and Grand Bahama, and so we're expanding to South Central, we're expanding as far as Bimini.
Yeah, no, this is a really, really extensive list, and I see Acklands and Crooked Island, Inagua, Long Island.
And we want, you know, sometimes when we look at education, we know how expensive it is in an archipelago. It means that it's very challenging to provide the same equity across the country. And so we're attempting to do that. Before we focused on the core subjects, now we're adding in the other subjects. The children have asked for it, their parents have asked for it, communities have asked for it, the organizations who these children have to work for have asked for it, and so that's why we're providing it.
For a long time, I've heard one of the criticisms I've heard about our educational system is the fact that there is always so much emphasis placed on the academics. But there are so many of our children who would do so much better if we had a little more focus on the technical and vocational education.
Now, it's still important for us to ensure that children are functionally literate. That's the language and the math. That's just the foundation. Everyone has to have that. However, we had to expand, and we know how we learn. I always say to people, I'm a kinesthetic learner. I like to touch. I'm a visual learner. I need to see. We have children who are auditory learners. They love reading. We have children who are mathematically inclined, musically inclined. We have children who are naturalists. They prefer to sit on at the window and look outside and be outside.
That would probably be me.
Yes, and so we have to cater to all of these learning intelligences or learning modalities. Children come with a priori knowledge or knowledge that innate knowledge, innate skills, innate abilities, you know, and they must be channeled where their interests and abilities lie, and that's what we're seeking to do.
Madam Director, thank you so much. We have a lot to talk about. The Director and I last met in Abaco back in 2019, I think it was, following Hurricane Dorian. As we get ready to recognize the anniversary of that storm, it's a reminder of how a catastrophic event can interrupt a child's education so quickly. When we come back, we're going to talk about the learning loss and other speed bumps on the journey to proper education. This is On the Record. We'll be back right after this.
So are you excited about coming to school?
Yes.
What are you looking forward to the most?
Mathematics.
What grade are you going in?
Grade 5.
All right, so how do you feel about coming back to school today?
Amazing.
Are you excited for the new school term?
Yes, sir.
What grade are you going?
All right, a busy week on school campuses nationwide. Kids of all ages and grade levels returning for a new school year. Welcome back to our show here on The Record. Our guest tonight is the Education Director, Dominique McCartney-Russell. The learning loss for some kids began with Hurricane Dorian. But with only 2 islands affected in that storm, the Ministry of Education was able to pivot and get those kids back in school within a reasonable time. But in March of 2020, a global shutdown from COVID-19 dealt a blow that for nearly 2 years meant that students were not face-to-face. Madam Director, what has that learning loss been like for the ministry and for our students?
Having served in Abaco, I can say to you, Jerome, that it was quite disheartening for us to see that we were not able to offer the kind of support our children needed because the schools were destroyed. And though we had the virtual environment, some of our children couldn't access it. They didn't have electricity. They had devices. They had to use solar chargers, but they had generators. And sometimes during the day, they didn't have gas to put in the generator. So it was really heart-wrenching for us. And so when you consider that on the heels of Dorian, then you had a pandemic, and we had so much support coming in, but they kind of left us because of the pandemic. And as a result of that, not just Abaco and Grand Bahama, but the entire country, we saw that after our testing, 44% of our children needed some kind of intervention. 44%. And that diagnostic test showed us where the gaps were in their learning, gaps in the knowledge, as I said, gaps in skills, even in sports. When they came on the field, you saw the lack of skills, skills that they had before the pandemic, they didn't have. And so skills development. We also saw a lot of communication issues. Instead of solving problems by talking to one another, children were fighting, they were displaying behaviors that were not norm. We also saw the environmental gaps. Some of their home environments were not conducive for children. They were not children, they were the adults in their homes. And of course, we saw motivation gaps. We saw a lethargy towards education. Oh, I don't want to go to school. I want to stay home because they were isolated. And so it was quite disheartening. However, all of our team members got together, and we're still constructing our strategic plan, but we started putting some things in place to mitigate the issues that we were seeing.
I know that within the months following the full reopening of school, there were so many children who were still absent, who were not turning up, who teachers had no contact with. How are we, or what's the progress being made to get those children back into school?
Well, the minister put a task force together in every district, and we utilized our team members, our parents, community members, local government, pastors. We had everybody walking the streets looking for children. And you can imagine when I visited a home and I saw the child trying to crank up the generator so that they could go on the virtual platform. We saw things like that. Or the children, one child at home taking care of the 4 little siblings. It was, like I said, it was disheartening. And so when we discovered what the issues were, for example, parents didn't have uniforms, and we told them, listen, send the child to school. They don't need to be in uniform. Send them to, we prefer them to just be in school. Or they didn't have breakfast or lunch. They didn't have shoes. Our team members provided for these children. We also sought social services, and other organizations assisted us. We also employed a number of attendance officers to ensure that the children we found, to make sure that they continued to attend school. And so we are now consistently at 91% attendance. And those children who still have chronic absences, we have employed a more hands-on approach where our attendance officers and our social service officers, even our administrators, visit those homes to encourage those parents to ensure that children attend school. So we would have gotten the majority of our children back in school, in the classroom every day, so that they can get an education.
I simply have to ask this question. What prevents these parents from sending children to school? I'll just stop there. What do you find are the reasons that these children aren't coming to school?
Based on our research, we've had a plethora of reasons. One of them, for example, the parents said, I leave the home at 6 a.m. So I expect that they would get ready, I lay out their clothes, but the child did not go to school. The child is home on their on their tablet. Or the child, like I said, who's taking care of their siblings, or the child who has to work to help provide for their family. Yes,
Work.
we've had some of that. And so we have used moral suasion in the first instance to say to parents, it is against the law. If your child does not attend school, then you are subject to, some going before the courts. And so we've had to use some of that to say to parents, listen, get this child in school. We've used, like I said, social services have been our partners. Urban renewal have been our partners. Police officers have been our partners to ensure that these children get back in school. And then, of course, we have our civic organizations and faith-based organizations who assist us as well, just to be mentors to these children, because some of them do not like school. And so we have to always show them how valuable education is. And what we've discovered too, sometimes when you see a child not attending school, you look at that parent, they had some issues in school as well.
So there's not the value on the
The value did
education,
not
yeah.
transfer, or the lack of value transferred. And so we always have to remind them of the importance of an education, especially against illiteracy and ignorance.
Wow.
Yeah.
There are some interventions as well, I know from the minister's remarks, to deal with these students who are dysfunctional and disruptive, and who, in addition, have gone missing. How are those interventions working as well, or how do they work?
Well, first and foremost, once we would have gotten the results from the testing, the standardized testing that we provided for all of our children, those results showed us where the gaps were in the learning, specific for every single child. And so once we knew what they were, our teachers were then given strategies on how to assist the child, real instructional, evidence-based strategies. But we knew that that would not be enough, because the teacher still has 35 children in the classroom. And so we would have engaged 22 special education teachers that we have placed across the country. We also have a partnership with Barry University. We have 14 teachers who are completing their master's degree in special education, and they will be completed next year. But these 22 teachers are in very strategic places, and we will provide pull-out sessions for those children. And we're also, we have standalone programs for them as well. We're also continuing our after-school enrichment program for the literacy and numeracy for all of the children who struggle. And we also have early morning 8 a.m. sessions for these children. And we are going to train our parents so that what is done in the classroom 3 hours a day is reinforced at home, and they can use their tablets, self-paced, utilizing the strategies and programs, the instructional programs that we have already embedded in the program for them, and at their own pace, they're learning.
Interesting, the information that you're giving us. The education minister in her address on Sunday spoke to the fact that the Ministry of Education had recently undertaken or commissioned this study. Some 40,000 plus children were tested, providing this data, which is available for every child, as you said, in his or her class. As a teacher, how am I able to take that information and really translate that? I think you started to speak about that, but now you have empirical evidence of what's happening with the children. How is that impacting the ability of teachers really to reach children and to teach all of them? You're looking sometimes at 20, 30 kids.
Yeah. And first and foremost, our teachers already knew that there were issues, because when the children came back and they saw the issues, they started lamenting, and we listened, because they're in the trenches, they're on the ground. They, children were not able to read, not able to comprehend the content. There was just a lot of things going on. And so they anecdotally said to us, we need to do something with these children. And so that's one of the reasons why we just didn't only test the children. We asked for strategies, evidence-based strategies that we could use that would assist the teachers in providing the engagement for our children. And so what happens? The child is given a lesson. The teacher will teach that lesson, and that lesson will address that particular gap. And they give activities. You'll have a culminating assessment. If the child is successful in that assessment, they move on to the next skill or gap. If they're not successful, there is another remediation or a lesson that is actually embedded in the remediation program. And so as the child becomes successful at mitigating the gaps and they gain the skills, they are then channeled to the next skill. And so there's an ebb and flow, process that will go back if they need to go back, move forward, back and forward, so that it is very targeted, and a targeted approach to their learning.
That study revealed that nationally 44% of our students require intervention. What does success look like to the ministry? What number would you like to get to? Obviously, we'd like to get to the point one day where none of our children need it, but what would you say is a measure of success in terms of the reducing that number?
Normally, when we look at success, we look at it incrementally. And incremental success for us is a 5% increase. And for us, that means that if we're at 44%, we want to reduce that by 5%. To be quite honest, within the year, we want to reduce that by 20%. We want that the programs that we've put in place, the remediation opportunities, that they would catch on and our children would become functionally literate at grade level. We are very cognizant that success is not a sprint. We know this is a marathon. We know that some of these children, their gaps are 3 and 4 grade levels. And so if they can navigate and be able to get to 1 grade level, then we're happy for that. And then, of course, next year, the next grade level. But some of our children are able to move quickly, because the reality is, though there are gaps, they do have some learning. They do have some skills, and we're just seeking to fill where the holes are.
What happens to that child in that 44 percentile if there is no intervention? What is the future for that child if the ministry, teachers, and even parents are not intervening now?
Let me tell you, the future for that child is grim, or could be, let me say it that way, could be grim. That child can contribute to our crime statistic. That child can contribute to the need for more social intervention. We have to take care of that child. Government has to take care of that family. That child could contribute to just even environmental degradation. That's as far as that could go. And so that's why it's important for us to ensure that we look at every single child, that our eyes are on every child. Every child counts. Every child needs to have access to an equitable education because we're interdependent. We have to be socially responsible for one another. And so when a child does not get the education he or she should get, it means that, they are, it's a weight for the whole country. It's a weight for the country because they're not going to get gainful employment or may not get gainful employment. And as a result, we have to take care of them socially. And so it means that a lot of the funding that we may want to use for innovation, we have to use for social needs. You know what I'm saying? And then not only that, when you consider that we have a lot of our young men killing one another, some of them dropped out of school as a result of not having quality educational opportunities. And so we want to decrease that number, and we believe that education can help with that.
It really is a domino effect when you think about it. According to the minister, some training will be provided to parents so that they can assist children at home. Help us to understand what that's going to look like, given the complications we already have with some of our parents.
And we've already started it. Minister would have instituted a national PTA forum, and she meets with parents once a quarter. Last year we met with parents, and we would have given them some strategies to assist children with the GLAT examination. And of course we're going to continue with that to provide training so that they know what we expect of the children when they're home. We're also seeking to provide support for parents, self-help support, letting them know where they can go to get information, resources, and also giving them support in terms of what the curriculum looks like, what is in the curriculum, the content, and how they can support that child at home. For example, signing the homework. Once a child receives homework, we expect that they do the homework. The parent can simply sign to acknowledge that the child has done the homework. That's a big thing for us, you know. Connecting with teachers on a regular basis, coming to PTA meetings, being involved intentionally in the child's education, participating in PTA. We've discovered those schools who have that link between home and school, those children, they do a whole lot better.
And not just show up when something's wrong and you're now at odds with the teacher because of the child. But that's another show. But I wish to also quote a portion of the minister's speech over the weekend. The portion of the speech that I'm going to reference says the curriculum reform underway is bringing a stronger integration of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics into subject learning, and now also integrating the arts into these programs. We have begun training of our young people in 21st century skills such as coding and robotics in both primary and high schools. Give us some insight into what this will mean for our children.
Okay, first, let's talk about arts integration. While we do have teachers who integrate arts into the core curriculum, we want to seek to be more intentional about that, because the studies have shown that when children use their skills in artistic abilities, that the cognitive development is even that much greater. Not only that, they attend school. You know, you can imagine when they're dancing and they're singing, they're using poetry, they're drawing. When we integrate those into the curriculum, they allow for more greater student achievement. And so that's one of the reasons why we are intentionally focused on adding that to the curriculum. But as we look at the curriculum reform, we are seeking, like I said earlier, to provide more experiential learning so that a child who learns about the mangroves in the classroom actually gets to go out and see a mangrove or plant a mangrove. We want that the learning becomes authentic and that it provides for real-world examples. And so we're seeking to institute more experiential learning in the classroom in math and science. And then, of course, we want to ensure that our children know their national identity. You know, so more civic education. We believe if children take ownership of their country, they know who the distinguished Bahamians are, they know who we were in 1952, 1967, 1973. You know, they're aware of our forefathers, and they take ownership of their country, they love their country. Perhaps we will have less crime. Perhaps we will have more cohesion, more collaboration.
More pride.
More pride,
yeah.
You know.
And I'm very heartened to hear things like coding and robotics, because that tells me we are thinking futuristically and we are moving forward. Good stuff there. Well, making the grade is our topic tonight. My guest is the Director of Education, and we've got a few more questions in our final segment. Stay with us.
It's kind of the same, but it's more intense because there's more students and there's older people here, so it's more, I guess, I wouldn't say scarier, but it's different. I'm looking forward to learning to go into 8th grade and then to go higher and higher.
Well, a 7th grader of the NGM High School in Long Island getting ready for the start of the new school year. This young student, like many other family islanders, is entitled to the same level of education as her counterparts here in New Providence. The Ministry of Education is mandated to provide that universal education. A former Family Island administrator, our guest tonight, is the Director of Education and was at one time, I think, the district superintendent for the island of Abaco. Dominique McKinney-Russell, welcome to our final segment of the show. How challenging is it for teachers in the islands, in islands like Long Island and Abaco, when you consider the different life, the different resources even that are available or may not be available? What are some of the challenges with education in our family islands?
Well, first and foremost, because of the size of some of our schools in terms of the number of students, it's challenging to provide teachers in those areas, because when you look at what we traditionally would do is look at where the greatest needs were, and I put that in quotes, or the greatest number of students, we would send teachers to those areas. And that's one of the reasons why we instituted the virtual platform, because we wanted to ensure children in the family islands got access, the same access to quality educational opportunities. More than that, curriculum material, not being able to participate in quality field trips or have the material on hand. And so that's one of the reasons too why we created a digital repository of curated lessons and strategies and resources for teachers to employ. Coupled with that, the distances that children have to travel to get to school, because in that area where they may be living in their settlement, we may not have a school there, a high school. We put primary schools in every settlement, most of them. But however, high schools, they could be a distance away, and so students sometimes have to travel the bus, sometimes for an hour to get to a high school. So those are the challenges.
If you're on a key, sometimes even taking a boat over to get to the mainland.
Yes, sir.
So there are lots of challenges. This week, we were privy to the national exam results. They were released by the ministry, and I want to talk about those results. There was some pushback, as is the norm. I've been in this business a long time, and every year we have national exam results. There's a lot of debate. But in your estimation, and from the ministry's perspective, how are our kids, how did we measure up this year in terms of national exam results?
We saw some really bright spots. While we know that coming back into the brick and mortar would not be easy, because we were cognizant of the gaps that we saw in the results tested. We knew that it would have to be a marathon, that our children would have to be given the opportunities, and of course we have to reinforce to make sure that the learning caught on. And so we saw a lot of, in the results, the national results, a movement away from the U and the G and the F, more to the D's and the C's. And so for us, that's progress. It meant for us that our children were gaining the foundational skills. They may not have gotten the ABC, some of them, but they were moving from the very bottom from unqualified to having some basic skills. And so for us, that's a move in the right direction.
I want us to spend a little bit of time explaining sort of the core versus the extended, and helping us to understand how they are graded, because it's my understanding if you take the core subject, there is a ceiling in terms of the grade, and then of course the extended allows you to get a higher grade. But help us to understand, first of all, how that works.
I'll give you an example in terms of commerce, for example. The student could take coursework that they have a percentage of the grades allotted to that, and then they take paper 1, and those two together will give them the C. And if they take paper 2, that will give them the opportunity to advance to an A or a B. The core tests their foundational skills, and then the extended, that's a little bit more challenging for the student. And so some students take the core only based on the recommendation from the teacher, although in grade 12, if they decide to, they can take the extended paper on their own without any recommendation. However, if they take the core, they get the C. And if they take the extended paper, they can get the A or B. And we have a number of papers like that.
How do you now, though, when you mesh are those grades placed together? And is there any differential in looking at them? Because if I can only get a C and I'm now grouped in with others who can get up to an A, how does that affect the overall average?
It affects it, and that's why we say to people who report on our results, to be very careful because there's so much that goes into each of those results. For example, when we say 500 plus students got A to C this year, that number includes students from grade 12, students in grade 11, students in grade 10. However, numbers from the previous year, we had students who may have taken their exams last year, or they may have taken it in grade 10. And so when you add all of that together, the numbers would be greater. Because some students, we allowed them to take their exams earlier because they had the skills to do so. And so they would have gotten their 5 subjects before the year that they should have taken it. And so while this year we may have 500 plus, if you add all of the students who would have taken it the years before, it would definitely be more.
So how do we now define success, though? Looking at all of these things that contribute to that 500 of those numbers, students who are retaking, students who are only taking the core, and when we group that all in together, how do we as a public measure whether our kids are doing better, or what is success supposed to look like for us?
That's a very good question, and it's very difficult to answer in the sense that there is so much that goes into ensuring that children become successful. And why I say that is because some of our children, they bloom late. Mm-hmm. You understand? Mm-hmm. And so that's why we track them, even in grade 12. Once they leave grade 12, we track them so that if they need to participate in Smart Start with BTVI, that we encourage them to participate, or participate in one of the trade school at BTVI. But in terms of what we would consider success for our children, we want them to be functionally literate. They have to be functionally literate in numeracy and literacy. We want them to be able to think critically. We want them to work together. We want them to see themselves as an environmental steward, to work collaboratively. And so those for us are measures of success. And when we do see the majority of our children get to those benchmarks, then we would consider ourselves as being successful.
I want to use the remainder of our time to talk about something that's very important and close to me, especially. The ministry has announced the elimination of waiting lists for the placement of students with special needs. 22 new special education teachers are being placed. What is that going to mean for our special needs children?
Listen, this is one of the initiatives that I'm most excited about, because I was a principal and I had a special education program at my school. And when you have a list of students waiting to be tested, their parents are frustrated because we didn't have the resources in place. But now we do. We are even putting a special education program at government high school for those children who have mild and moderate in intellectual deficiencies. And of course, we have our standalone programs at the Marjorie Davis Institute, Stapleton, the Beacon, etc. But we wanted to ensure that children who were not severe are also given support. And so those teachers are put in place to provide pull-out sessions as well as standalone sessions that will give children the access. And let me tell you how good it is, Jerome. When those children get into that general environment, they have a pull-out classroom for themselves, but they may do the PE and the health and family life with their peers. And it is growth for both, because our children in the general population learn empathy. They learn to know how to navigate with these children. They're not afraid of the children if they are autistic, They're not afraid of a child who has epileptic fits. They know how to care for them. And we also have a special education week so that all of our children learn to gel together. And I can tell you from my own experiences, to see a child come into a school, you can't touch them, or they don't want to move upstairs, they don't want to speak, and to see 3 years later that they are socialized, they're social butterflies, and they can speak for themselves, they're confident even though they have these deficiencies, and they become a more, they can then go and get gainful employment. They may not get the kind of employment we expect to get, but they can serve, but they can serve somewhere, and they become self-actualized even with their challenges. That's what we're seeking to do. And let me tell you, we had 36 on the list waiting to be placed, and they are no longer waiting. They actually have a place to go this year because we have teachers in place to meet their needs.
That is the best news that I have heard for this entire hour. And, you know, congratulations to you and the ministry for really going head on into that, because that's so important. And it's so important, too, so that these children develop empathy and they become adults who can now appreciate their peers who have special needs. And, you know, so this sometimes the stigma and the behavior that we exhibit towards people who learn differently will hopefully come to an end. Madam Director, thank you. It has been a great hour. All the best to you and continued success. As I say to many people on the show, heavy is the head that wears the crown. I know you have a lot on you, so we wish you continued success, and certainly we will do what we can as an organization to promote the work that the ministry is doing, and to also ensure that our kids get the best possible opportunities that they deserve for a better country. Eh?
Thank you very much.
And thank you for coming on. That's going to do it for this show. Special thanks to our guests and to the entire On the Record team, and of course to you, our audience, for watching. Stay tuned to find out how you can become involved in our discussion. Tune in next time as we continue to explore the issues that directly affect you. Once again, I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. We'll see you next time right here.